Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Imagine being in the game for a while as an author, even with a successful series under your belt. It could be a safe lane to stay in, first veering off into a concept for a crime fiction story that intrigues you but is unlike anything you've ever written before, nor that your publisher has released. And you'd be sitting where best-selling author Cara was when Murder in the Family became an instant New York Times, USA Today, Financial Times, Amazon UK, and TikTok sensation, with perhaps the most staggering statistic of them all coming with the fact that it was the 10 most Googled book of 2023, with the Oxford Mail reporting that someone in the world buys one of her thrillers every 50 seconds. The Guardian celebrated it as ingenious, complex, and immersive, while the Sunday Times, where it hit the top spot as well, called it addictive. Hunter's wildly popular D.I. Adam Fawley series has entertained fans for years throughout Close to Home, In the Dark, No Way Out, All the Rage, The Whole Truth, Hope to Die, and Making a Killing. And she joins us today to talk about it all. Cara, welcome to the show. When you turn the page back in time, how young do you remember first falling in love with storytelling?
I was one of these people who was always a reader. I can never remember a time when I would look at a page and think it was just squiggles. My parents told me I taught myself to read when I was 3. So, this has been a life, literally a lifelong love of words and language. And I just read everything. And I love local libraries over here because we didn't have a lot of library books at home. And so, my parents couldn't afford it. So I was always at my local library, and I think I just read my way through the entire children's section by the time I sort of graduated onto grown-up books. And I just always loved reading. And I would write then as well because you're encouraged to do that as a child. You're encouraged to do creative writing. But really, once the time you get to the point where you're doing exams and stuff like that, the time for creative writing, at least when I was growing up, seemed to get lost. So you were, doing the serious stuff of trying to get qualifications and things like that. So I don't think I wrote anything creative in that sense since I was probably, 10 or 12. But I did keep my love of books and reading. I went on to study English literature at university. So that's always been an absolute passion. And sometimes people who study English as a major, it sort of puts them off being a writer because you see so many wonderful things in the course of your course. You think, I'll never be able to do any better than that. So it can actually put you off. On the other hand, it can teach you a lot, of course, unsurprisingly, about how to put a book together, how does the idea of plot and character work. You absorb a lot of sort of technical and practical stuff, even almost without realizing.
And when do you first remember putting any of that into action within your own world with words?
It wasn't until much, much later I'd had a career in finance and in PR, and finally decided there was a sort of evolving need to try and write something that hadn't been there all that time. I wasn't one of these people who had a burning desire to be a writer from a very, very young age. It evolved much, much later on. And I like telling people that because I think it's good for people to feel that writing is something you can come to later in your life. And actually, it can be there waiting for you and you've got more to say.
Attending Oxford University, who do you remember from among your professors, or even before then, if any teachers stand out in your memory, who inspired your desire to pick up the pen?
I had a wonderful English teacher when I was about 14, who I've lost touch with now, but she was very inspiring. I think you often have an inspiring teacher about that age. And then the thing about the Oxford system, which I'm not sure is replicated anywhere in the US, is that because it's collegiate in every sense. So the colleges aren't just, in effect, halls of residence or dorms. Everything happens within that community. So you're taught by people who actually are attached to that college. Yes, you will go to lectures as well that are university wide, but your life is very much college based. You live there, you're taught there. The people who teach you are the fellows at that college. So yes, I've still got very close relationship with one of my professors who's a good friend to this day. I've known him longer than probably pretty much anyone else I know apart from my family. So yes, it's a very special privilege to have that particular style of teaching because I had tutorials, just me and him, which is just incredible. He's a world expert on the Romantic poets, and I get him for a whole hour a week on my own. It's amazing privilege.
You would then cast off on a fascinating writing journey. Please reflect back on working in PR for Guinness, and then getting your publishing start writing in historical fiction in this earliest era of your writing life.
Yeah, it's interesting because having done the literature degree, I then went into finance and I suddenly shifted over to doing numbers, which I'd never thought I was any good at school. But that was a good training. It was like sort of getting a different part of your brain to suddenly start working and just to think in a different type of logic to narrative logic. But I suppose it was inevitable that that was only going to be a bit of a phase, and I was able to move. I was very lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. I was able to move sideways within Guinness from a finance and treasury job into the PR team, and rediscovered my love of words and started doing a lot of stuff around that type of creativity. So I was doing theatre sponsorship work and that type of thing, and eventually became. I was the director of comms at the end. But I was doing a lot of writing as well. So I was writing speeches and that type of thing. And that gives you a different sort of writing muscle, if that makes sense. Because I eventually became a copywriter when I once left that job and moved on. So I became a writer for hire, which actually gives you a very good respect for things like deadlines. You can't afford to have too much sort of precious author block stuff. If you've got a deadline, you've got to deliver. And that's actually very good training for being a novelist because it does teach you just got to get on with it and you've got to keep the promise you made. I had written some in my real name before, but those were all historical. They were mysteries, but they were historical fiction. The previous ones had all had some sort of literary angle. So if you like, I was drawing on my English lit training. I wrote 4 of those and then sort of took some time off while I was doing a big renovation project on the house. And I thought sort of that I might have finished with writing at that stage. I wasn't sure I would go back to it because that series had sort of finished.
The Economic Times recently broke the news of a deal where television programming giant Fremantle's UK producer Castlefield has secured the rights to adapt English author Cara Hunter's D.I. Fawley crime novel franchise into a series. The 4-book series begins with 2017's Close to Home and follows Within the Dark, No Way Out, and All the Rage. These novels follow Detective Inspector Adam Fawley as he deals with domestic tragedies and crimes that demand answers from the family and friends of the victim. When did you first become inspired to transition from historical into crime fiction? And was D.I. Adam Fawley originally just intended to be a one-off star in the first release of that series, Close to Home?
This was a departure for me, definitely. No, I suddenly got the idea for Close to Home, which is all about a twist at the end, which anyone who's watching this who's read that book will know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone who hasn't, but it's a massive twist at the end. And it's obviously a set in a contemporary environment, which I hadn't done before. So suddenly I had this idea and I had an agent already because of the previous books. And I went to her and said, what do you think? She said, you've got to write this thing. You really have got to. That was how it all started. But it didn't start, definitely, with Adam. It started with the plot of that book. And because it's about a missing child, it required a police officer, shall we say. It was inevitable that would be part of the evolving story. So he just became a piece of plot machinery to start with. I mean, he wasn't carrying anything at that stage, and in a way that was quite good because it meant he became someone in his own right before he suddenly became someone who was going to have to carry a whole series. So that was entirely serendipitous for me, but it was a good luck because it did give him a chance to breathe as a character. I don't actually have children myself. So there was a sort of an imaginative leap I had to take. Though we've all had those moments where you think the worst thing has happened. So hopefully I have a reasonable, empathetic imagination, so I could think myself into the position of a parent who was faced with that situation, even though I never obviously had anything remotely like that happen to me. But also, you're right in that the environment that you're writing in a contemporary setting is so different. And the most obvious one for any crime writer is the forensic environment that you're writing in. I mean, because when I was writing stuff set in the 19th century, they didn't even know whether it was human blood or animal blood. So really, you're going back to sort of Sherlock Holmes and that sort of patient observation, but not a great deal of science attached to it. But now, of course, everything is forensics. If you're writing crime or in real life, looking at crime. So that was a steep learning curve for that book, to actually get up to speed with how it works, because I've always been a real sort of nerd about wanting to get things right. So it was really important to me to get things like procedure right in terms of the police side, and just make sure that I hadn't made any stupid mistakes about what you might find at a crime scene, or indeed not find.
What did you find fascinating about pacing the story, in the sense of writing against the clock as they're trying to find the missing girl before it's too late?
Yeah, the sense of panic, the sense of pace. It's a really, really good question, because what I was trying to do with that book was consciously to recreate the experience of seeing really good crime TV, because some of them are so good now. The writing is top notch. But also, the thing about TV, the good ones, is that you often get these really snappy, fast paced narratives where you get a different point of view, very short scenes. People are used to that now. Not like the old days on television where you get literally sort of 5 to 10 minutes of one scene. Whereas now, you get that really quick interchange between perspectives, between settings. And that's exactly what I tried to do with the book. And as anyone, again, who's read any of the Fawley books will know, they're all really, really short scenes, change of perspective every time. And it worked in that sense, I think, in that it does create tension, it does create pace. But the other thing it does, because I'm always being told this, is it gets that, oh, just one more section thing into the reader's mind, because it looks, oh, it's only a short one. It's not like a whole chapter. I can just do another section. And some of my favorite feedback is when I get people sending me message on social media saying, I just finished it at 2 a.m. Damn you. Which is, and then I do the sorry, not sorry thing, it's great though. If someone can't put it down and just keeps wanting to do one more section, then you know that you've got that sense of pace in the narrative.
Did seeing the release of your first crime fiction versus historical mystery hold any standout memories apart from the previous experience?
It was a totally different experience. I think historical fiction isn't such a big seller. I mean, there are some massive sellers in historical, obviously, we could all name them. But in general, it doesn't sell as much as crime. So it was sort of being in a slightly different part of the market. So the way that the publishers handle it is slightly different. And I was very, very lucky, because this one went to auction, Close to Home went to auction, which is one of those writer dream things, the idea that someone's bidding for your book rather than that you're trying to sell it to them, is just, right in heaven. So it was a completely different experience right from the start. And so I did. And it's a bit of a sort of rest is history type moment, because it just caught light and went, and it was a bestseller, and it's been translated, I think it's 30 languages now, something like that. So that was how it all started. But one of those dreams come true, actually, and I've had a few of those since I've started writing these books. But that was the way it started with that book. It did far better than I could have dreamed.
Given license by its success to write another, first heading off into a standalone, what drew you back into D.I. Fawley's world to crack a second case together here in the Dark?
Obviously, some of the things you have in a series are very useful for that. So you have a base of characters, and you have your setting. And in a good crime novel or a good crime series, I think setting is almost always as important as the characters. I know I set mine in Oxford thinking, hang on a minute, everyone's done crime in Oxford with Colin Dexter and Morse, and actually I called it something else in the first draft, but my editor sussed me out really, really quickly. So that but she said, turn it back into Oxford, because nobody will have any problem imagining what the setting is. So I did. So the setting was consistent, obviously. I was able to flesh out Adam's character a bit more. We didn't know a huge amount about him in the first book, apart from the fact that he had a young son who had taken his own life, which was his backstory, really. And the reason I gave him that backstory in the first book was that I wanted him to be particularly sensitive to the idea of losing a child. And it had happened relatively recently. So he was still very raw from that. So that was almost all I had about his backstory in the very first book. And then there was an emotional need for that. But now I had more time with him, and obviously the prospect of yet more time with him in future books, I was able just to start unpacking some of his history and where some of those things had come from, how he and his wife had reacted to that surprising and terrifying thing that happened to them. Very at that point, very unusual. And sadly, it's become more popular, more common that children do have that type of clinical depression. But that was something that I was able to do with that second book, to flesh him out, but also have the challenge of coming up with a really good idea, because I know we're all frightened about second book syndrome, aren't we? Always worried that people who come off reading the first one, come with quite high expectations. So I had to come up with a story that would catch people's imagination. And as often, I drew on real life crime to do that.
Did that reflect in the next case that the Oxford-based team Fawley leads solves in No Way Out?
I'm often asked by some interviewers that there's often a child involved some way or other in the books, and they're right, there is, but it's not because I'm doing that deliberately. It's because I'm looking particularly at dysfunctional families. That's one of the things I'm interested in exploring, and how children are part of that, whether they like it or not. Most of the time, they have no choice, and also how they become collateral damage, and how that plays out. So that was the idea really for No Way Out. And I think it's that one, in a way, is one of my favorites really, because I think it has a sort of psychological resonance and depth, as well as the story. I think there's a lot more going on in terms of examining the relationships in that one than perhaps in some of the others.
Now, the Oxford Mail wrote as the popularity of this series continued to rise that ITV has plenty of options, but an Oxford-based crime drama they should not overlook is the popular crime novels of Cara Hunter. Her 6 novels featuring D.I. Adam Fawley could be adapted for TV. Miss Hunter's series of crime novels set in the city have been incredibly successful following the publication of her debut in 2017. The author's 6-book franchise and the biggest crime-writing brand to have launched in the UK in the last 5 years has sold more than 1 million copies to date in the UK and across 25 territories worldwide. Her debut novel, Close to Home, was an international bestseller, topping the Sunday Times and Amazon bestseller lists, and was publisher Penguin Random House's biggest selling ebook of 2018. With echoes of real-life crime stories, the writer toys with our expectations and turns them on their head with her carefully plotted, twisting storylines, coupled with the engaging drama of the professional and personal lives of Fawley's team. Please talk a bit about that team and how new entries like All the Rage and The Whole Truth showcase that exciting blend of winning elements for readers.
I've always, again, it's back to being authentic, because certainly in the UK, I know in the US, there is a lot of detective work done in pairs, partners. We're all familiar with that. It's not really like that over here, and it never really has been. I mean, it's you see it on TV all the time. Morse and Lewis appear to be the only detectives who are operating in the whole city of Oxford. Where are all the other guys? But here it's almost always been just a very much team effort. I mean, there may be partnerships within that, but it's a team effort. So right from the start, I was very concerned to make sure that the team environment was authentic, and people found it realistic. And it's always nice when you get feedback from police officers saying, yeah, that's sort of broadly right. That's how it works. So I was, again, quite lucky that I'd created a core of the team in the first book that worked. And since then, some of the challenge, which I'm sure you'll appreciate, has been around varying it a little. So bringing in the odd new person, and also uncovering some more of the sort of backstory of those characters as well. So Gareth Quinn, for example, who's the sort of flash guy in the team, a wee bit of a cliche, but then again, how does a cliche become a cliche? Because it happens all the time. So we find out later on in the series that perhaps some of his sort of brashness is down to insecurity, and that I discovered, as much as the reader did, that he had a difficult childhood and his mother had postpartum depression, and you can see how that would play out in the life of a little boy who suddenly found himself rather alone. So that's the sort of thing you can do once you have time. So you've had a few books, but also you've got people who are reading, who are invested in those characters and are interested in finding out about their private lives. So it's one of the joys of doing a series. There are some challenges, obviously, doing a series, but one of the joys is you have these people that other people outside the readers care about. I enjoy writing female characters. There's a surprise. Verity Everett, who's a sort of very staunch and sort of solid character, but also Erica Summer. And Summer is my little joke with my reader, because Summer is actually an anagram of Morse. So it's and she has the same initial, which is E. So it's like my little nod or wink to the reader to say, yeah, I know I'm in this Oxford place, and yeah, there's been some detective here before. I can't remember his name. So yeah, she's a nice one to write, because she's very strong, strong character, and probably a bit more like me than Verity is, certainly in terms of personality, anyway. And just the others, you know, it's the sort of pattern of the relationships. And I also like writing scenes where Adam isn't in it at all, or where you see him through their eyes. Now, that's always a nice thing to do, because a lot of the book is written in the first person through his perspective, but there's always third person narrative as well. And I like writing scenes where they're interacting with him, and you can see how they see him as a boss. So that's something I enjoy doing. For Morse related reasons, I try to avoid too much to do with the university, because I mean, it's been done before, and I'm always surprised how many people get killed off in Morses. I'm surprised the university has any teachers left by the end of it. But you know, deliberately trying to show people a different side of the city, not the sort of golden chocolate box bit in the middle. But that book, The Whole Truth, is all about an alleged sexual assault by a professor on a student, with the twist being that the professor is female and the student is male. But the idea of, I wanted to look at the whole dynamic of sexual assault, and the idea that it's, as we all know, it's about power. It's actually not about sex, it's about power. So the relationship between a professor and a student is an obvious power relationship, which could be exploited. So it was stupid not to set that within the university. I mean, it would have been sort of willfully stubborn on my part not to set that in the university. But I deliberately chose one of the newer colleges, and one of those that was originally an all-female college. So again, I was able to explore lots of those sorts of dynamics around, you know, sort of masculine and feminine, and what we expect of predators and all that sort of thing. So yeah, that was I enjoyed doing that, and it was an interesting thing to explore. Though there's a lot more going on in that book, which is mainly around Adam and in his past, and his past catching up with him. So there's two definite separate narratives in there, and only one of them is the one about sexual assault. Again, it was like sort of uncovering his past, and I don't know whether other writers have this experience, but he didn't, as it were, spring fully formed right from the start, or even in the second book. It was like peeling away the layers and discovering things. And I know that sounds crazy, because everyone always says, "Well, hang on, you made this guy up. He doesn't actually exist." You know, no, you talk about discovering more about him as if, you know, as if he was separate from you, which clearly isn't true. But it is like that. And I think other writers would say the same, that if you create somebody, they reveal themselves to you slowly. And certainly in terms of his past and how he met his wife, and the fact that that was actually really quite a traumatic period for both of them. And now that particular period is coming back to haunt them both, because of what the decisions they both made at the time, which were done for the right reasons at the time, but now may prove to be difficult to manage. And I'm trying hard here not to say anything that gives it all away, but that's what I found interesting, this sort of dynamic there between him and his wife, and what they hadn't told each other as well. You know, they'd been married a long time, and they both knew what was going on when they first met, but they didn't know the truth either side, not all of it. And I thought that was interesting to look at.
The Library Journal, in their glowing review of Hope to Die, revealed that its roots were inspired by a real-life crime in Australia, resulting, once your imagination got your hands on the case, in an intricate, carefully plotted police procedural, where the mixed media used in the book adds to its appeal. We'd love if you give viewers a sense of what that process is like for an author to take factual elements of a case and fictionalize them within the world you created here for Fawley & Co. to crime solve in.
I hate using the word inspired, because it never feels right, but it's had its origin in a real life crime in Australia, which I saw on a 60 Minutes program. And I think because I watch so much of this stuff, you know, I'm a complete sort of crime fiction person and true crime person. And I saw this program about this case in Australia, and I think I had my jaw on the ground the entire time. I simply did not believe that this had happened. And I often say now that if I hadn't been able to tell my editor that this was based on something actually happened, I probably wouldn't have got away with it because it's so incredible. Literally, you cannot believe it. A woman who, well, a girl, she was living at home with her family. She wasn't very old. She's in late teens, early 20s. She managed to have 3 full-term pregnancies without anybody apparently knowing. She was doing competitive water polo at the time. So she was spending half her life in a swimming costume. So it's not as if, there was an opportunity for people to realize what was going on. And of the 3 babies, the first and the third she had adopted perfectly, normally, without, obviously no one knew, but the babies were well looked after and taken into new families. But the second child disappeared completely. And everything she told, and it took years for that to be discovered because of the amount of secrecy there'd been. But once it was being investigated, she just kept telling lie after lie after lie. And it was just quite extraordinary to watch the actual case and the way that she was being interviewed. And I just started thinking, well, what if that actually happened? What would I want to know? I'd want to know what made her behave that way. And I'd want to know where the baby was. So that's where this story came from, and this idea of something that happened a long time ago, and resulted in a criminal conviction, which it did with this case in Australia. So the mother was convicted; she's still in prison, and this happens in my book too. But what happens if the child turned up again? Would that work? So that was the starting point for this book. What happens if the child comes back? Because that throws a whole new light on the previous crime. Was it indeed a crime at all? But then what happens now? So that's where that one came from. And yes, you do have to sort of the intricacies of linking them without giving too much away too quickly. But that's the sort of thing I love. I mean, I'm a sort of demon stitcher when it comes to plots, of actually putting things together and then dropping in the Easter eggs for people to find once you know where it's going. You can then start having some fun and dropping some bits in, which I really like that bit.
What a fantastic way to put it. What is a demon stitcher for the viewer who hasn't heard that part of the process described quite that way before?
I suppose what I meant by it was that, I love getting into the nitty gritty of it and sort of really going in sort of stitch by stitch, moment by moment in the plot, and trying to be fiendish about it, trying to sort of have some fun with my reader. And I think they have fun with it too. So that's part of why you read crime fiction. You're trying to unpuzzle it, aren't you?
You took a hiatus away from D.I. Fawley for a while before returning with him on the page again and making a killing. What can fans expect to find has changed, given that time has passed in the lives of these characters too, while still feeling familiar to those who have grown to love the series so much?
Making a Killing is Adam coming back. So as you said earlier, I had a gap. I gave him a break. I gave myself a break, and we had Murder in the Family in the meantime. So it's back to Adam. Time has passed because I was very concerned that I didn't want to write about lockdown. So I wanted to come up with a reason why I could just, as it were, leapfrog over all of that, because it's not something I want to write about. So time has passed. The team has moved on, and he has as well, which has become obvious to me was a good thing to do, because it sort of put some more energy back into it. People are, the pieces on the chessboard have moved around. So that was a good thing to reinvent and refresh the series. But yes, again, this time round, there's going to be an interesting case coming back to haunt him. In fact, it may well be that everything that happened in Close to Home is going to be having another go round and going to have a look at what happened, and did it really happen the way he thought it did? There you are.
When USA Today covers the release of any author's book, you know you're breaking through into the mainstream, as you, it's safe to argue, did for a second time following the 2010s and the 2020s, when they spotlighted your one-of-a-kind setup for a novel whose chapters are told through episodes of a reality show, posting in their coverage that with one body and 6 experts, can you solve the case before they do? Mega best-selling British crime novelist Cara Hunter makes her big American debut with a wholly immersive thriller like none you've ever seen before. Written as a teleplay of a true crime documentary, it has the reader puzzling away, reviewing photos, maps, coroner's reports, and other evidence as they read. The exciting multi-narrator audiobook features 5 actors telling the story from 5 different perspectives. Can you tell who's lying? fleshing out of the case itself that it was one that gripped the nation. In December 2003, Luke Ryder, the stepfather of acclaimed filmmaker Guy Howard, then aged 10, was found dead in the garden of their suburban family home. Luke Ryder's murder has never been solved. Guy Howard's mother and two half-sisters were in the house at the time of the murder, but all swear they saw nothing. Despite a high-profile police investigation and endless media attention, no suspect was ever charged. But some murder cases are simply too big to forget. Now comes the sensational new streaming series Infamous, dedicated to investigating and perhaps cracking this famous cold case. Years later, a group of experts re-examined the evidence with shocking results. Does the team know more than they've been letting on? True crime lovers and savvy readers can review the evidence and testimony at the same time as the experts. Where did you first conceptualize this brilliant structure to the story that everything else is framed around a murder in the family?
Which was, as I often say, the most fun I've ever had at a laptop. I mean, writing that thing. As I said before, I'm a complete true crime junkie, so I watch loads of this stuff, and I've been really interested about how the good ones, the ones that really compel you, how they're done, not just the content, the story, but how they're done, how the narrative is told, and how in some of the really good ones, it's very disintermediated. There's no narrative voice. There's no voiceover telling you, and then 3 months later, X, Y, Z happened. Sometimes it's just stuff like clips from people's social media, and you're actually watching the whole series, the whole story put together by this type of bits of narrative, as it were. And I suddenly thought, well, maybe I could try to replicate what I enjoy about watching true crime TV on the page. And the one that I watched that I thought was the sort of the model for this was something that's called Wrong Man, which is a Joe Berlinger series, whereby he got together a group of experts. There's a couple of retired cops, there's a lawyer, there's I think a journalist, and he puts them all in a room and gives them a cold case and says, okay, see whether you can solve it. So I said, oh, that was a really cool way to structure the series, so that you then have, instead of chapters, you have episodes, and within each of the episodes, all you're getting is effectively a screenplay of what's happening on the screen. So these people are going through old evidence, they're questioning whether the original investigation missed anything, and getting new evidence as well that wasn't available at the time. Either forensics has moved on or whatever it might be. So that was fascinating in terms just of the interplay between the characters and gradually having them become clearer about what really happened. But the other thing I enjoyed about doing it was the Agatha Christie twist, which came to me quite late in the day, but was a lot of fun. That right at the very beginning of the book, so not a spoiler, we know, though the people involved do not know, that one of the people on the team making this TV show is actually the original killer. So we have the ability to try and work out which one of them it is, which one of them is lying, as well as trying to work out what the motive could have been, how are they connected, what was, so there's lots of layers of investigation for the reader there. And so far, almost everybody who's read it has really enjoyed that part of it and said, it's making me a detective that I really enjoyed. I had all this raw material, I had all these documents and maps and forensic files and everything else, and so I was able to see if I could get there before the team did. So when it's murder in the family, it's one of those things that does what it says on the tin. It's about murder in a family of about 20 years before. Very, very wealthy family living in a very nice part of London. And the dynamics of the family at the time was the mother and 3 children. And the mother has recently married a much younger man. And he's the person who gets killed. The 3 children she has at the time, 2 girls and a boy. And obviously there are tensions at the time because of this new marriage and the fact that the father is no longer around, and they're very much missed by the kids. So Guy is the little boy at the time, but now grown up 20 years later and become a filmmaker. And he's now trying to find out exactly what happened to his stepfather all those years ago, and seeing it. I mean, let's face it, seeing it as a potential career break. That if he can, create a series that's particularly, take well received, then he'll, have a very good sort of career boost out of it. Though there's the other angle of this is that he's allegedly the director, but actually all the strings are being pulled by the producer, who is a very big character in it, a guy called Nick Vincent. And he's very Machiavellian, and he knows exactly how to play the reality TV angle of this, and which he does. And that's one of the things I enjoyed about it, which you don't see on a true crime TV equivalent, where the team gradually turn on each other, which is very much again the sort of it's the Agatha Christie idea. As you realise you've got a killer in your midst, you start becoming very suspicious, and they turn on each other in quite delicious ways. So certainly enjoyed writing that part of it. I've always known who the killer was, and at the beginning I had really, really big synopses. It was almost like a comfort blanket or something, that it's something to hold on to, that I had this synopsis that told me where the story was going. I just had to keep to it. And yeah, things might change a bit, but broadly that scaffolding remained in place the whole time. But it gradually got less of that as I got better at it, I suppose, or more practiced at it. But Murder in the Family, when I sat down to write it, I did not know who the killer was. I had a short list of three, and you might well be able to guess who those three were if you've read the book. And in fact, there's a sort of ghost ending in the book of one of the three that it could have been, only it turns out not to be. So that's one of the endings that I could have written and left in and carried on. But no, I didn't know who it was. And for the first time, and it was a really nice experience, the first time I had the confidence to let the story tell itself to me, which I hadn't done before. And that was very enjoyable. I only had a very relatively vague idea who the characters all were when I started. I tried to have the experts have quite distinct personalities because, that's just easier for the reader to keep them apart. But I didn't have a sort of 2-page synopsis of anyone's character or anything like that. I just started and saw how they developed when I, as it were, threw plot things at them. So the three people I thought might be the killer, I didn't have a clear enough idea of who they were or what their motivations were until I started writing them. And then it became crystal clear eventually who it was. But I'm not going to tell you. In Hope to Die, the one before that's just come out in America, that one has a true crime series running through it, looking at the old case. And this series is called Infamous. So it's like one of these series where you have this, the umbrella title, and then each time round it's a different case. So in that case, it was the series title was The Chameleon Girl, which is what they were talking about, the girl who had the baby and then the baby disappeared. Whereas this time round it's the same. So I sort of brought that through from Hope to Die. So this time it's another series of Infamous, but this time we're looking at who killed Luke Ryder.
How cinematic is it in your imagination as you're spending time through different points of view with a cast like this, working up to the moment, and then the rest of the reading world find out who done it?
I'm very visual. I don't play anything back, and I very rarely read out what I write. But I've always had a very visual imagination, so I see everything as a TV or as cinematic scene. So and I find that helps, especially if you're in this particular book where everyone's most of the time in a room together in the studio, this group of people. So just to imagine the dynamics of the physical movement and who's sitting next to who, I think is, for me anyway, it is an important part of it. So I do have sort of pictures in my head of what they look like, but it's possibly going to make it to TV. We've sold the rights to Sam Mendes's company, and I'm going to be absolutely fascinated to see what they do with it, because I know they're going to do something different from simply transposing it onto the screen. It's going to be more than that. And actually, I love some of those characters so much that Nick Vincent and some of the others are turning up in the next one as well. So they're going to invade Fawley's world, which is going to be rather fun.
In that spirit, do you envision a potential sequel to Murder in the Family?
I doubt I'll do another Infamous one in exactly the same way, partly because it's always worrying if you find yourself turning into a one-trick pony. But certainly a sequel stylistically, because I love the way that was written. So even if it wouldn't be a crime show, it might be something else. But this idea of having just the narration from the characters and not from a third person voice like me, I really love doing that. People seem to really enjoy reading a book put together that way. So I certainly intend to revisit that aspect of it.
We'll certainly look forward to it. What have you enjoyed about this new invention within your writing style?
Well, some things I developed from the Fawley style because all of the documents and mixed media that I've always included and included more and more as time goes on because people have liked it so much. So that aspect of it was just an evolution, if you like. But certainly going from conventional prose to screenplay was a revolution. That was a big change. And I've never written a screenplay before or a play or theatre or anything like that. So this was completely new and different. I just loved it. The book was just flying off page. I mean, it was really fast to write in many ways. And obviously there were moments where I had to try and work out what was actually going on myself, but it just really flowed, and I just felt very huge affinity with the way the story was being told. So that's one of the reasons I like to try and do that sort of thing again.
Finally, before we go, what do you say to an author on the rise looking to carve out their own niche on bookstore shelves like you have?
Practice, because you won't be brilliant straight away. No one is about anything unless you're Mozart, and you know he's not he's not like anybody else. So practice, be persistent, be patient, grow a bit of a thick skin. But the thing I always say now, which I didn't follow myself because I sort of didn't know it, but what I always say now is start with short stories. One of the reasons, obviously, is it takes less time. It's shorter. It won't take as much of your life, but it's really hard to do. I've written a few short stories for newspapers over here, and they're the hardest thing I write because it's so difficult to do something satisfying in a short space. And it also exercises all of the novelistic requirements, if you like, in a short space. So a beginning, a middle, an end, setting, character, ideally, if it's a crime related thing, a twist. The trouble with people who start writing novels straight away is that you get loads and loads of beginnings and you don't get any practice at doing middles and ends, particularly ends. And they're so important. So I always say now, start with short stories. And I always suggest people read the George Saunders book, Swimming in the Pond in the Rain. You know that one? He is so brilliant. He just takes apart all of these classic Russian short stories and shows you how it's done, shows you how these stories have been put together. And it's absolutely brilliant. I think it's based on his lectures at, where is he? Princeton, I think. You would know. But he's done this lecture course in the Russian short story for a very long time, and he's writing it as a practitioner, so as a writer, not as a sort of academic lecturer. So that's a brilliant book. It's not that old, 5 years, I don't know, but you can easily get it, and everything you need to know about trying to put together narrative is in there. And once you started doing short stories, you can then look at doing something longer.
Cara, it's been wonderful talking today. Thanks so much for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.